Okay. Let's see. Everyone online can hear me? Is that? Yes. All right. We will begin with the Vajra lineage prayers. Once I get them. So, excuse me. I have to get the right order of technical things. So this afternoon, we will recite the prayer in Tibetan. Du som shedang kunjen karma pa che shi chung je ju ba zi nam dam je ta cai san pa ren ro ba so Salam Chaya Chilanganye Nyame Drogen Tambo Kajula So Adep So Kajula Manam Jubazena Nam Jelo Shenlo Gomje Kamba Sorbashin Senorga la Chanje Padam Tsende de Tacher Gonchena Yeku Shen Angelo Gomje Sombashin Menga Mala Junda So Gomchena German Mogu Angelo Yang me gomji son bashin kasha to de ngom so ma je ma ju de gar jo de gom shema gom sha dan lo nam do ngo chu go so ba shin ji ya mai ji ya cha va la manga cha go chela kode meto lo kewa kundo yanda matam Rame Longjim Satang Lam Yende Zonem Dorje Changin Gom Nyor Tojo Dorje Changi Gom Nyor Tojo Chatsawaran Chiji Shabatan Jesu Iran Kushi Suvai Gewa Jungze Dagi Jisab Tamje Dagi Chanju Chirmo Saji Puju Jugji Meto Tamri Liji Nide Jembadi Sangye Shengde Midde Pulwai Droku Namda Jingla Jebrajo Semje Namgi Samba Taloi Chera Jita Checho Tumon Tebai Chugi Kola Kordo Zo Min Chujin Bonan and Zaje Kunjing on it, Raza Jakuram was under Zepa. Zalam Shabla Gucha, Da Da Zun Lamje, Lotus the Droid in Jelam to So, Chelam the Droid in Jelam to So, Lam Trova in Jelam to So, Trova is the Droid in Jelam to So. The Dharma Expanse Palace of Lakanishta is the essence of all Buddhas of the three times, who shows me directly my mind is Dharmakaya. I prostrate to the glorious, exalted Guru. Please bless me and all beings that our minds become the Dharma. Please bless us that the Dharma become the path. Please bless us that the path dispel confusion. Please bless us that confusion arise as wisdom. Now, please think to yourselves that we must, no matter what, bring all of our mothers, all sentient beings throughout space to the state of completely perfect Buddhahood. And in order to do so, we must listen to, contemplate, and practice the Dharma. So think to yourself that this is the reason why we are listening to the Dharma this afternoon, and listen with this motivation of bodhicitta. The Dharma that we are listening to is The Way of the Bodhisattva by Shantideva. Of the 10 chapters, we are discussing the 9th. We have discussed actually the first 8 and the 10th already, so this is the last chapter we're discussing. And this chapter has 5 main topics. The first is the benefits of bodhicitta. The second is the characteristics of bodhicitta, which is a description of the 2 truths, the ultimate and the relative. And the third is the methods of meditating on emptiness. The meditation on emptiness has 2 main parts: the selflessness of the individual and the selflessness of phenomena. And in the selflessness of phenomena, it's talked about in terms of the 4 foundations of mindfulness. The foundation of mindfulness of body, mindfulness of feelings, mindfulness of mind, and mindfulness of Dharma. 4 foundations of mindfulness. And as I said before, but I think it's worth, because the English term, actually the word foundation is kind of an interesting translation. This is the word that most translators use, so I use it. Some people translate it as the close placement of mindfulness, which sounds kind of awkward in English. So what it means is that actually it's by applying our mindfulness and awareness as we examine the body, feelings, mind, and dharmas, then we gain insight into the nature of things. In the Theravada tradition, the point is to gain insight into the 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths, the fact that everything is suffering and that everything is impermanent, suffering, selfless, and empty, that there's the cause, conditions, origin, and production, and so forth, all the 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths. Here in the Mahayana, instead of looking at trying to gain an understanding of the Four Noble Truths, we're trying to gain an understanding of the ultimate truth, the emptiness of all phenomena, by examining the body, mind, body, feelings, mind, and dharmas. So in this section, we discussed this morning the foundation of mindfulness of body, which is essentially examining what is the nature of the body. And in examining what the nature of the body is, you cannot identify anything that is the body. It's not separate from the parts. There's no body separate from the parts. The parts are not the body. So the body is an idea that we project upon the parts. It itself is empty. And then when you look at the parts, they themselves cannot be established as anything. Established meaning that you can't say that this is what it is. It's this thing. It's an independent thing. There's no independent thing that you can say is the body. It arises because of causes and conditions in a constantly shifting, what do we say? Constantly shifting appearances, much like the appearances. You can watch a movie, you can see a body in a movie. And our physical body, though it seems more real to us, is actually no different in that it also is produced by causes and conditions and interdependence. There's nothing single or solid. And the parts of the body themselves are made up of smaller and smaller parts. And until the end, you can't find any smallest part because it can always be divided ad infinitum. So in the end, there's not even if there's nothing that the body is made up of, what is the body? For example, if you're going to have we have our bouquet of flowers, like the same prop, it's made up of stuff. And because there's stuff that you can say there's a bouquet of flowers. But if you examine it, you can't find any of this. It doesn't really exist in any ultimate truth. So what's there? So by doing this, we are able to free ourselves of any projections, any ideas about the nature of things that prevent us from actually seeing what it really is. In other words, our ideas of being a body, a bouquet of flowers, or whatever, prevent us from seeing the nature as it is, which is that it's a constantly fluid continuum of interdependence that arises and appears to be this way for a while and then perishes. But there's nothing that's really identifiable there. So now we've come to the section on the mindfulness of feelings. And the mindfulness of feelings is important because our feelings often really lead us astray. We want things that are going to feel pleasurable. We don't want things that are painful, and we completely ignore things that are blah. Right? We don't worry about things that are neutral. They're just too blah. We don't worry about them. So because of that, we what are we saying? Because of this, we then engage in actions and karmic actions that cause suffering for ourselves. They cause temporary pleasure. That temporary pleasure then changes and becomes suffering. They might cause actual pain in the moment. They may well cause pain in the future. And so we need to overcome that. So we need to examine the cause of feelings. Feelings are also the basis of disputes. It's what, when you get over, when you have a dispute, you are, for worldly people especially, it is over things that are going to give you pleasure. Food, land, all the good things, the pleasures of whatever, any sorts of pleasures that you might get out of a relationship or something or whatever, any security or something, which is trying to get pleasant feelings for yourselves. This is the basis of dispute. You think that someone else is going to threaten it, and so you get in dispute. Someone else wants what you have. And so your feeling about that is the cause of dispute. So if we understand the nature of feelings more clearly, then there's less for us to be upset about, and then less for us to have any disputes about. So this is one of the reasons why the mindfulness of feelings is so important. So before we talk about the text, we have to figure out what do we mean by feelings. And it's, as I mentioned this morning, it is the feelings of, essentially, we'll take it in the threefold. It's the pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral feelings, 3 types of feelings, or 5 if you distinguish the mental and the physical, but really 3, pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. Now, how they arise is that there's an object that we think there's an object. Of course, we've just done the mindfulness of body, we realize there's no real object, but we think there's an object, and your mind sees it. So you see this absolutely stunning bouquet. It's a nice bouquet. And there's something pleasing about it. That's pleasure that arises. So you have the contact of the eye and the faculty that produces a feeling that is pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Or you might just say it's flowers, or so what, and that's a neutral feeling. You might say this is a really ugly bouquet, and then you have a feeling of unpleasant, right? So you have the feeling that arises from the contact of the eye and its object form. Or when you hear a sound, you hear a sound, there's a contact of the object and the faculty, and that produces this a pleasant, unpleasant, or unpleasant form, and so on for each of the 6 consciousnesses. It's probably most vivid with our body consciousness, because you feel something like someone is, touching you nicely. It feels good, right? Like I remember the first time that I held Rinpoche's hand, it was like so warm and so soft. It was very pleasant, right? So that's a feeling, that's a contact of my body with Rinpoche's hand, of my hand with Rinpoche's hand, and a feeling of pleasant as a result. Sometimes you have feelings of pain. As Rinpoche always said, you pinch yourself really hard and then look at the feeling of pain. You'd say, well, you pinch yourself and you have the contact of your body with a painful thing, which is your pinching fingers, even more if you have fingernails and are grating into yourself, right? And there's an unpleasant feeling, pain. Or you might have a physical illness that is causing pain. So there's a contact of your body, the internal with the illness that causes pain. So there's contact of an object and the sense that produces a cognition, and that cognition is associated with one of these 3 feelings: pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. Okay, is that clear? So you have to have 3 things. You have to have the faculty, you have to have the object, and they have to touch. The faculty, the object, and the contact. So this is where we start to look at it. Now, when we start to look at it, again, Shantideva starts out by looking at the Sankhya school. So I have to go back a little bit to the Sankhya school. In the Sankhya school, the position is that, as I mentioned this morning, you have the Purusha, the conscious self, and you have the primal nature. And then everything that the primal self, the Purusha, that the soul experiences, is a manifestation of the primal nature. So you've got this primal nature. So that means that everything that you experience and all the pleasure, pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral that is in there is inherently in the object. It's not in the mind. So when we're talking about the Sankhya school, they're saying that if something is pleasant, then the pleasurableness is in the object itself. It's part of the object itself. For example, it is inherent in chocolate cake that it is pleasurable. This is something that most Westerners will accept, but few Tibetans. So we think that pleasant experience of the taste of chocolate is inherent in the chocolate. It's part of the chocolate. And so that's where Shantideva is going to start out his explanation. So when we talk about the mindfulness of feelings, there again, as usual, we have to go through the different topics. The 4 topics are that the feelings themselves are not established. In other words, there is no real thing that is the feeling. Then you look at there is no cause of feelings. And then the third is the object felt does not exist. So that means when you feel something, when you have an experience of something, that object also does not exist. And the fourth is that there is no apprehension of feelings. So this is going kind of through the feeling itself. The feeling has no cause, no contact. And then the object that you're feeling doesn't feel good. And then also the mind that is perceiving it doesn't exist, is not established. So feelings themselves are not established. Pain does not ultimately exist. So this is, again, speaking to the Sankhya school. They say that pain is inherent in the primal nature. It's part of it. It's one of the three qualities of Rajas, Sattva, and Tamas. So I'm not going to try to make a connection there. It's too much for right now. But they say it's inherent in those, that pain, pleasure, and neutral feelings are inherent in the qualities that make up the primal nature. So it really exists. So Shantideva says, if pain exists in suchness, then why does it not distress the cheerful? So if we say that, I don't know, acid is painful, I mean, burning acid, like battery acid. Battery acid is painful if you touch it. If that is, no, that's not a good one. Pain does not exist in suchness, then why does it not distress the cheerful? There are all sorts of times, like, okay, here's a better example. When people are exercising, you can feel pain, but if you're in a good state of mind, it doesn't harm you. It doesn't change you from being cheerful. Why don't those racked with grief enjoy the tasty if it's pleasurable? So back to our chocolate cake. If chocolate cake is inherently tasty and pleasurable to eat, why would someone who is like grieving the loss of their only child who just died, if that in that state you're just overcome with grief, you try to eat something even the most delicious, it's not going to taste very good. You don't care, right? So why would that pleasurable thing, why wouldn't they enjoy it if it's pleasurable? Another way of thinking about it is if you, I think it's more with the earlier strains of COVID, if you lost your sense of taste for a year, and then someone gave you some delicious food and it all just tasted kind of like dull, and I mean, it's very hard. They give you nice food. They even give you chocolate, and it just, none of it tastes good. So that means that that experience of the pleasurable taste can't be in the thing itself, because if it were in the thing itself, you'd always experience it, right? It's not inherent in the thing, right? So pain does not ultimately exist, and by the same measure, pleasure does not ultimately exist. Then the other thing is that it's possible that what the Sankhya say was, well, sometimes there's pain there, but you don't feel it because you're so happy. The pleasure is stronger, so the pain is still there. Shantideva's response is, if it is not experienced because the stronger overwhelms it, then how can something in nature is not experienced be a feeling? So if something is going to be pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, if it's going to be a feeling, you have to experience it. If you're not experiencing it, there's no feeling, right? For example, if there is chocolate cake on another table and you are not tasting it, there's no pleasurable feeling of tasting it, right? Because it's not being experienced. If there's no needle jabbing you, then you're not going to feel the pain of being jabbed by a needle because there's no experience of it. So if you say that there's pain is there, you just don't feel it because this pleasure is stronger, then you're not experiencing that pain. So how can you say that it is a feeling? And so the Sankhya then say, but the pain is there in a subtle form. Has its gross form not been dispelled? If it's a different mere pleasure, the subtle form would be of that. So what they're saying is that when you are feeling pleasure and therefore don't experience the pain that is inherent in the object, therefore that pain has become subtle. It's become small, so small that you just don't notice it, but it's there, they say. And so Shantideva is saying, well, then the gross form, the actual experience of pain, is impermanent. It's been dispelled. It's no longer there. Therefore, it can't be in the nature, even if the subtle. And if it's a different mere pleasure, the subtle form would be of that. If you say that, well, then when you experience pain, that you have that mere pleasure, that simple pleasure that's there, that's very subtle, then that's what the subtle form would be of. So that doesn't work either. If causes of its contrary arise so pain does not occur, does that not prove that to conceive of it as feeling is just fixation? So if something that causes pleasure arises and therefore you don't experience pain, the reason you're not experiencing pain is because they're cause of something else. You're not experiencing it. So Shantideva says that at that point, to think of that which you are not experiencing as being pain, which is by nature a feeling, which is by nature experience, is just to kind of tack an idea on it, to project an idea and say, it's feeling, even though no one's feeling it. So in that way, like with the delicious chocolate cake that is sitting on the table, you cannot taste it. You are not experiencing. There is no flavor. There is no experience of it. So you cannot say that you're having a pleasant feeling from that chocolate cake, at least not from the flavor. Maybe from the scent, maybe from the eyes, but not from that. If you're talking about a chocolate cake on the other side of town that you're going to buy later on today and eat for supper, along with something else I hope is not all your dessert, but then that chocolate cake is not causing any sensation right now. So you cannot say that there's pleasure inherent in that. So feelings have no nature. So that means that feelings don't, saying that they don't have a nature means that there's nothing really there that is a feeling. So therefore, as its antidote, cultivate this investigation. The dhyana that grows in the field of analysis is food for yogis. So instead of being fixated on feelings of pleasure, pain, and neutral, instead what we need to do is we need to cultivate this investigation of the nature of feelings themselves to see that they do not have any nature of their own. There's no own being, no essence of the feelings. They arise and they go away. There's nothing there that is a true feeling. And we do this through the type of meditation called, he's recommending it here, that we do it through the meditation of dhyana. And in particular, the first of the 4 levels of dhyana. This is a deep meditative state, but it's not so deep that you can't engage in analysis. Deeper levels of meditation, the faculty of analysis kind of shuts down. But this is still on the level where it's a very calm state of mind and you're able to do this. And while you engage in that, that is like the analysis that produces that's like food for yoga. So it nourishes the meditator so that they can then achieve the results by meditating on that. So that's what this verse is speaking about. So in this way, we've examined the feelings themselves, and Shantideva has shown that the feelings are not real things that are outside of yourself. They're not something outside that's definitely going to be pain and pleasure in my example of chocolate cake, right? Actually, we can see with chocolate cake because for people who grow up eating chocolate, like most of us Westerners, we like talking about chocolate. And we always talk about chocolate as being something delicious. But you have people from other cultures who just don't care for it at all. They can't understand why we eat so much of it. When at the monastery in Vancouver, of course, people come and bring us various things. And when the monks are brought chocolate, I get a lot. Which is not really even the best for me, actually. I mean, I don't nearly as much as I get. I mean, of course, I appreciate everyone who brings it, but so I mean, if you want, there are other things that they prefer better. And there are things that they like that I don't really care for. Another way is to look at it as like if you think about with any of our foods, like there are things that are peculiarly Western foods that we like that other cultures don't get. Chocolate being one of them. There are things that are in other cultures that are peculiar foods that they think are great that we just don't get. And then there are some things that are delicious to everyone, like Tibetan momos. Okay, but even those, the pleasure is not inherent. So the next is talking about the aspect. There is no cause of feelings. And here, by the cause of feelings, we're talking about contact. It's like I was just saying. The sense contacts the object, and then a feeling arises from that. And here we have to be completely honest that we have to say right from the beginning that this was written in the 7th century. They did not think about vision as seeing as being light bouncing off the object and then into your eyes. They had absolutely no. They didn't have what we would say the scientific theories. They didn't have the instruments. They didn't have that way of thinking. They just thought about it completely different. They thought that there's somehow a contact between the eye and the form. It's the faculty of the eye, which resides in the back of the eyeball. They thought there was somehow a contact between the two. and that produced a feeling. Same with sound. They saw that somehow they didn't think of it as being waves in the air that go into your ear and hit your eardrum and then are interpreted into sound in the brain. That's not how they conceived it. They thought there was some sort of contact between the ear faculty, which is actually kind of, they describe it as being similar to in shape to the cochlea. But in both of these instances, they don't think that it's the gross physical thing that we see as being the cochlea or the retina of the eye as being the faculty. The Buddhist position, the traditional position, is that there is a clear form. It's basically like, you could say it's like an energy in the ear, energy in the eye, and that's what the actual faculty is. With the other faculties, they admit that there's contact. The scent comes into the nose and you smell. With the body faculty, it's clear. With the tongue faculty, it's clear that something has to touch the tongue in order to taste it. So for those three, they say there's contact. But with the eye faculty and ear faculty, it's a little bit different. But still, they think there was contact, even though they didn't get the idea that there were light waves acting as an intermediary, or waves of sound in the air, or sound waves in the air that acting as an intermediary. Is that too much of a digression? Anyway, so I'm hoping that that's making what we're talking about. We're talking about a 7th century idea. That does not, the fact that it's a 7th century idea that they're working from does not mean that it is not still a valid logic, even with our modern conception of how the senses work. These logics, I think, are still pretty solid. You have to think about them a little bit more. So, what Shantideva says, if there is a gap between the object and faculty, where is the contact? So when you have a visual form, actually, let's not do it. I'm going to do it all with, let's do it all with touch, because it's a little bit easier to understand with touch. Visual, because there is a distance, it makes it harder. So we're going to work with the faculty of touch, okay? So you've got the object. I'm going to call my right hand the faculty, and my left hand the object. I'm going to make fists, just for whatever reason. Maybe I should do palms. Yeah, I better do palms. Okay, so if you have your faculty and your object, and there has to be contact for feeling, and where is the contact? If there's a gap, there's no contact, right? Right? There's no contact. You've got the object here, or you've got the faculty here and the object here. There's space in between, a gap, right? So there's no contact. So there can't be any feeling. If there is no gap, they would be one. So you bring the two together like this. You've got, this is the faculty, this is the object. I feel like I'm in a preschool class. This is the faculty, this is the object, and then they ran off. This is the faculty and the object. And we say, oh, they're touching. But there's actually a whole lot of the faculty is back here. And a whole lot of the object is back here. They're not really touching. It's only like this brief surface. So if there were no gap, they'd actually have to be completely penetrating each other, kind of like the idea about the atoms that I was speaking about this morning. And what would be in contact with what? So you can't really say that there's contact. There's like this very thin surface, and then it's just like the surface of the faculty is contacting the surface of the object, and then it gets down, and then you get to the down to the smaller level of the, break it down to smaller and smaller parts. You've got the atoms of the faculty touching on the surface of the faculty, touching the atoms on the surface of the object. But as we talked about before, if the atoms are partless and then they touch, then they have to merge. Because if they don't merge, right, you've got two atoms. So now my hands are atoms. If the two hands are touching and the atoms have no parts, if the two atoms have no parts and they're touching, if they touch like this, then there's the touching parts. So in order for two atoms to contact each other, if they're not touching, they have to merge as one. Otherwise, they'd be reduced to having parts. So if they're not going to have any parts, they can only touch if they're completely in contact. So therefore, when you have the faculty and the object, they can't really be in contact, because if the atoms that are on the surface of this were contacting the atoms of the surface of the object, then they'd kind of like smush into each other. They'd all become one, right? So that's why you can say that there's no gap. So they would be one. That's what this third line means. And so what would be in contact with what? If they all become one, then you can't distinguish what is the faculty from what is the object. And if there's no faculty, if you can't distinguish the faculty and object, then how can there be any contact? Is that clear? You guys online looking clear? All right, I see some people laughing. I'm not sure if that's, a good sign or bad. Okay. An atom can't penetrate an atom. This is what I was just saying before. There is no space and they're equal. They're the same size. There's no space between them. They won't merge. They can't touch. Won't merge unless they completely penetrate each other. And without merging, there's no contact. There's no way for the atoms to contact. How is it logical to say that there is contact with the partless? Because if you contact the partless, therefore, there is a side that's contacted and a side that's not, and they wouldn't be partless. If you should happen to observe the partless come in contact, show me. So Shantideva's, saying to the opponent, you got to show me. If you say that they come into contact, you got to show me how it happens. It just logically cannot work. The second thing is that when you have, so it's a faculty contacting the object. Well, the faculty is physical. I mean, it's kind of energetic physical, but as we know from Einstein, E equals mc squared, there's a relationship between energy and mass. So that energy that would be the faculty is the same as mass and touching, contacting, right? So what if you say, well, it's not that the faculty contacts the object, but it's the consciousness contacts the object. It is most illogical to contact an immaterial consciousness, or as examined earlier, assemblies, as they are not things. So it's illogical for a physical object to contact the immaterial mind. The mind it's not matter. Like for an object to contact another, if you have a water glass, I have to be careful with all this water right in front of my computer. If these two are going to contact, you have to have something physical. If they weren't physical, it would go right through it, right? So the mind, you can think about things, you perceive, you have images of things in your mind, but for the mind to actually touch something else, it can't, because in order to touch, you have to be physical, right? So because the mind is not physical, it cannot contact a non-physical thing. Nor can you say that there are contacts between assemblies, as they are not things. Now, when we say an assembly, what we mean by an assembly is something that is made up of smaller and smaller parts. So you say, okay, well, the individual atoms of this vase, of this bouquet, cannot come into contact, but you've got the assembly, the bouquet and the vase together. So this making this nice bouquet, right? There's contact between these is possible, you say. But the problem is that the assembly itself is not an actual thing. It's like made up of a whole bunch of other things. It's similar to the analysis of the body that we had just this morning. We're speaking about how the feet and calves and thighs and so forth are not the body, right? The body's not in the parts. It's not in the parts partially in each part. It's not in the whole in each part. There's nothing separate from the parts that's the body. So that's a similar argument. Or it is also similar to the argument in the 8th chapter that says continua and aggregates like series, armies, and such are false. So a continua, like the continuum of mind, as we spoke about this morning. It's like if you have a line of marching ants, right? Ants marching along to find that honey on your counter. They're marching along in a line. When you say a line of ants, you can't find a line of ants separate from the individual ants, right? We spoke about this last year in the 8th chapter. If it's maybe been a little bit too long, right? Or when you talk about an army, you say an army is one thing. So you've got the Ukrainian army and the Russian army, and they're each one thing. But where is the Ukrainian army? Where is the Russian army separate from the individual soldiers? So the idea of an army made up of hundreds of thousands of soldiers is a projection that we have that based upon the individual things. So it's, in essence, it is false. It's fiction. It's useful fiction, maybe a destructive fiction if it's an army. Okay, so then the next one is, as there is no contact. So contact is the cause feelings, right? Because only when you have contact between the faculty and the object can you have the feeling of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. If there's no contact, how can there be a feeling? As Shantideva says, if contact thus does not exist, then out of what does feeling arise? For sake of what are these travails? What causes injury to whom? If there is not anyone who feels, then there is not any feeling either. Once we have seen this situation, why is it craving would not cease? So if there's no contact and then how can the feeling arise? Because its cause is missing. And if no feelings are arising, we work hard to get pleasurable feelings and avoid unpleasant feelings or painful feelings. Why are we bothering to do this work if the feelings do not actually exist? If they're actually emptiness? If there is actually nothing that can be harmed by them or benefited by them? What causes injury to whom? So what feeling is going to cause injury to what body or what person? We can't find an individual self who's going to be injured. You can't find a real feeling of pain or pleasure that's going to either benefit or injure the person. If they're both like illusions and you really see that they're like illusions, then there's no problem. Drupal Khenpo Habu sometimes talks about, I've heard this story secondhand. Drupal Khenpo Habu told some of his students, who told me, that his teacher, when he was very old, had some sort of a problem with his leg. And I don't know exactly what it was because the conversation was happening in Tibetan and it was not very specific. It was an illness that is usually extremely painful, where you can basically poke your finger through someone's muscles. They kind of all rotted out. It might have been something like gangrene or something like that. I don't know. He was very close to death. And anyone else would have been in extreme pain, but he had been meditating for years. He had complete realization of the nature of mind, or the nature of all phenomena. There was absolutely nothing. He was just sitting there and the doctor was poking him. The doctor was completely amazed that he was, that he wasn't writhing in agony, but he was just perfectly normal, sitting in meditation. Another one is these days, Khenpo Tsutim Gyatso Rinpoche, who hasn't taught verbally, I should say, for many years. He had a stroke or something. I don't know exactly what. I just don't pay enough attention to anything outside of my own little area of what I do. But he had some medical stroke or something, and he's basically been incapacitated, and he's been bedridden for a long time. He can't move. He's been essentially bedridden for years. But he's not getting any bed sores. He's not seeming in pain. People say when they go and visit him, there's like this radiance of just like peace. Even though he's not moving, he's not doing it. He's like, the worst of vegetables by Western standards, but he is just there. There's nothing wrong. So when you really realize it, the reason I'm saying this is just, it's not some intellectual thing, what causes injury to whom? Yeah, and you think, we've got examples, living or recently, within the last 30, 40 years, people who've been around in living memory who are real examples of this. It's not just something that we're talking about. It's not just study. It's something we have to really meditate and work on, try to come to understand it. If there is not anyone who feels, and there is not any feeling either, once we have seen this situation, why is it craving would not cease? So when you really have that level of understanding, and I'm not talking about the intellectual understanding that comes from listening to it once. What we have now is the level of listening. There's some understanding. It seems reasonable, it seems good, but we haven't yet gone through the level of contemplation, which is to really think it through, really test these objects, look at it in our own experience, see what it is. And then on the basis of a really stable conviction that comes from that, to then meditate, to really become to actually able to see this by whatever meditation methods we want to use, then we can get to the point where this will happen for us too. We will also be able to see that. We will also be able to overcome our craving. It takes a long time. You cannot expect that by reading the way the Bodhisattva a few times that you're going to realize the true nature of the body and feelings, and therefore everything will be hunky-dory. No, you still have to work. You still have to do the meditation. But it's an important step that we're doing now, but it is just a step. Then the third of the 4 topics is the object felt does not exist. When seeing or touching, it's by a nature that's dreamlike and illusory. So when we touch things, when we contact things, what we're contacting is an illusion. It can't be found to have any real existence. There's no real thing, which we'll be speaking about tomorrow, the nature of there not being any real thing. And what is contacting it? The sense, the sensory faculty, or the mind that's thinking about it. That also is dreamlike and or illusory. So the contact, the whole feeling is dreamlike and illusory. So we have to come to this understanding that everything is like an illusion. We have to train ourselves in this, remembering that everything is like a dream or an illusion. And the more we do this, the benefit that will come is that we'll take things much less seriously, much less as a threat in the short term, and then eventually become closer to actually realizing it ourselves. There is no apprehension of feelings. So this is the 4th of the 4 topics here. Refuting the apprehension of past, present, and future feelings. So when you apprehend a feeling, the question is, you're feeling something that's, you experience pain, pleasure, or neutral feeling, right? You've got these 3 feelings you're experiencing. Is your awareness of that feeling, is it caused by that pain, so you feel it afterwards, that pain or pleasure? Or does it come before it, or does it come at the same time? As they arise together with mind, feelings are not perceived by it. The classic Buddhist explanation of the mind, the way we generally explain the mind in Buddhism, is that any time cognition arises, it's associated with what we call mental factors. And among the mental factors are feeling, which is either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So any mental factor has a nature, or any cognition is associated with a pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral feeling. So if they're happening at the same time, how is the mind aware of it if you're assuming it's a real thing? Now, Shantideva earlier in the, which chapter? Earlier in this chapter, he refutes self-awareness. We went over this last year, the idea that there's some real self-awareness where cognition is aware of itself. He says that can't be true. There may be illusory self-awareness is fine, but real self-awareness, where there's a real mind aware of a real feeling, is not possible. So as they arise together with mind, feelings, if they are real, are not perceived by it. If the feeling happens earlier than the mind, then when the mind when the mind that was aware of the feeling experiences the feeling, it actually wouldn't be experiencing it, it would be remembering it. The earlier feeling would be remembered but not experienced by a later cognition. And similarly with the future, if you have a future cognition, if you have an earlier mind that is aware of the future cognition, how can it be aware of it? It hasn't happened yet. It doesn't exist yet. It never existed. So there's no subject who experiences the feeling. So it means basically when we have a cognition, we always feel like there's something that is experiencing something else. Like you have what we would call the apprehending or perceiving aspect, and you have the apprehended or known or perceived aspect, the knower and the knowing as part of every cognition. Well, if what you're knowing, the feeling isn't there, and so what about that apprehender? So they're not experienced by themselves, nor are they felt by something else. So the feelings don't experience themselves, as we described last May. The Shantideva doesn't assert that there's self-awareness, nor are they felt by something else. He said there's no actual, we have the illusion of there being an apprehender, but there isn't. There is no one at all who feels, and feelings therefore are not real. In addition, when you look at the mind, at the selflessness of the individual, if there is no individual who could experience anything, how can there be a feeling that they experience? right? If there's no one to experience it, how is there an experience? So the just as the idea of there being a self who's experiencing it, or an apprehending part of mind that's experiencing it as illusory, so also is what is being experienced, the feelings. So in summary, thus in this egoless assemblage, how can they cause any harm? How can feelings cause us any harm? If there is no individual self, if there's that to be harmed, if there are no actual feelings, no cause of feelings, if there are neither feelings nor any causes for feelings to cause any harm, what is the harm? This is what we were speaking about just a moment ago. If you really can actually truly realize this, as we go through the intellectual process of first listening, gaining a certain understanding, and then the contemplating of really thinking this through, analyzing it carefully, and gaining certainty, we decrease our fixation on feelings. And that by decreasing our fixation on feelings, that means they do us less and less harm. It's when we do meditation that can actually see the nature of feelings, the nature of the mind that experiences the feelings. When we do our whatever meditation we're doing and realize the ultimate nature, then you're really, at this point, there really is no harm that they can do for you. So we've come to the next, the foundations of mindfulness. Mindfulness of mind. This has two parts. The mind cannot be established. And the second is the object cannot be established. So you've got two things here, right? Because when the mind happens, the mind knows, and the mind, if it's going to know something, there has to be something to be known. If there's nothing to be known, there's no awareness, there's no knowledge, there's no knowing, right? So you have to have the knower and the known, the mind and the object. The mind doesn't work without an object. The mind cannot be established. Mind does not dwell in faculties and form and such or in between. Mind is not inside and not outside, and there is nowhere else it's found. And so when you are experiencing, say we are looking at our lovely bouquet, right? We're looking at our bouquet. So the mind does not dwell on the faculties. So you're looking at it, you have a visual cognition of the bouquet, right? That mind is not in the eyes, is it? Is it in the form and such? So when you have a visual thing, this is what we call a form, right? The visual form of the bouquet. It's not there. It's not these. Is it in between? Is it, okay, so I'm holding this bouquet so closely that I can't see them without, I have to put on my, reading glasses to see the bouquet, but, it's not in between. Where is it? This is actually very similar to the Mahamudra investigation of investigating the mind and object. But here it's happening in a more conceptual way. So the mind is not in the faculties, it's not in the form, whereas you have to really look and see where the mind is. Mind is not inside and not outside. So if there's is mind inside the body someplace? Is it outside the body? If it's inside the body, where is it? As Khenpo Gangshar says, if you touch the head, your mind is in your head. If you pinch your toes, your mind leaps immediately down to your toes. Your awareness goes wherever there's something to be aware. If there's something outside to be aware of, does the mind go there? Where is the mind? Now, this is an interesting line. Paolo Trengwa says that it should be translated a little bit differently. The way I've translated it here in the book is the way it's explained in most commentaries. But Paolo Trengwa said, it says, the inside is not the mind, and the outside is not the mind. A little bit different. The outside, or actually literally the inside and outside are not the mind. So what's inside you is not mind. What's outside you is not mind. Kind of a different perspective. And he explains this as saying that otherwise, if you say that the mind is not inside, not outside, that it's a little bit repetitive of the first two lines. And there is nowhere else it's found. So if the mind is not inside you and it's not outside you, where is it? Right? So this is the problem. So we can't find the mind. What's not a body and not other, not mingled and not separate, is nothing at all. And for this reason, the nature of beings is nirvana. So the mind is not a body. It's not other than the body. It's not mixed with the body somehow. and it's not separate from the body because it's still linked to the body somehow, because you can experience things that are happening in the body. So if it's none of these, then what can it be? Because if you think about it, like if something is going to be the same as your body, it can either be the same as your body or different from your body. Or you could say it's mixed into your body, like mixing, I don't know, milk and water, or not separate. It's not, and it's not mingled with the body, but it's not separate from the body either, because you can't really say that it's not linked to it. But you can't find where it is, so it's nothing at all. And for this reason, the nature of beings is nirvana. So when you fully realize this, and you can rest in this nature of your mind, then it's just resting, seeing what it's like. And that is nirvana, the absence of suffering, the absence of any causes of suffering, just the transcendence of any samsara, to be able to fully rest in that. It's the nature of beings is like this, but because we are distracted and look outside and fixate upon our mind and body as being things, as being real, because we fixate on external things as being things and real, then we are unaware of this. We don't pay attention. But this is illusory. So to move on, the object cannot be established. So mind is knowing. For example, when you talk about mind, what we're talking about is the eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, and mind consciousness. All of these know objects. So is the mind at the same time as the thing it knows? Or does it happen before it? Or does it happen after it? In any way, it's difficult to say that the mind is knowing. So Shantideva goes through each of these. If mind precedes that which is known, what does it focus on to arise? So generally in Buddhism, we explain mind as arising from a number of conditions. One of these is what we call the objective condition. That's what it focuses on. The mind focuses on an object. When you look at your bouquet, the bouquet is what you focus, what your visual mind is focusing on, right? You look at the bouquet, that's what we call your focus. Okay. So you have to have that condition for the mind to arise. So it's generally said that these conditions, if the condition is a cause, right? So it has to happen before it to arise. So if the mind is if the awareness of the bouquet is arising before the bouquet does, what is it arising focusing? It can't, right? If the mind and known are synchronous, that means at the same time, what does it focus on to arise? Because if they're happening at the same time, the cause has to happen before it for the mind to arise. If they happen at the same time, they can't be mutually cause and result. Because, like if you have, what do we say? A lightning strike and a wildfire. The lightning strike has to happen first, not at the same time as the wildfire, right? The lightning strike happens first, and then there's the wildfire. Similarly, you have to have the object, the objective condition first, and then the mind arises from it. But if it is after what is known, what does the mind arise from then? So if it is after what is known, because the object is impermanent and changing in every single second, and perishing and arising in every second or every instant, then the mind that is arising in the next instant, the object has perished. It's not there. So what has it arisen from? So in any of these cases, you cannot say that the mind arises from the object. So in this way, whether you look at the mind itself, or whether you look at the so whether you look at the mind itself, or whether you look at the whether you're looking at the object, then it's difficult to make the mind work out logically. Okay, now to move on, I think we're moving on to the mindfulness of dharmas. So this basically dharmas, What you can think of this here is pretty much anything you can think of with your conceptual mind, with the sixth mental consciousness, basically all phenomena. Because we can think about things that are past and future. You can think about things that are too far away to actually perceive with your senses or somehow remote to you. You can think about them. So here, this again has three subsections. The all phenomena are non-arising, refuting the absurd consequence, and refuting that there is an infinite regress. The first part of this is all phenomena are non-arising. In such a way, one cannot realize the arising of any phenomenon. So realizing here means to know something, to really know something. So when you start looking at all phenomena using these logics, and also the logics that we'll talk about later, you cannot find any object that arises, of any phenomena that arises, because the mind doesn't arise, the object doesn't arise, there's no phenomena. We've talked about the no phenomena can be proven to arise if it's not known. So you cannot prove that there is anything. The next one is, then says, the problem here is that we are going back to what we spoke about in May now. We've been through all these logics explaining how to meditate on emptiness, selflessness and emptiness. And then you get back to the sticking point of the foundation vehicle and mind-only Buddhist schools. These are the schools that say that there has to be something real for there to be a basis, for there to be experience. If there's no basis of experience, how can you have experience? It can't just all be totally illusory, because then nothing's based on anything else and it all would fall apart. And so here we're talking about the Buddhist schools who say that either that there are external things exist, or the schools that say that that the mind exists but nothing else does. If there is thus no relative, how is it that there are two truths? So if you do not say that there are relative, let's take it from the level of relative external things, because it's a little bit easier to say that. If you say that there are no real true atoms that make up the vase and the water and the stalks and the flowers, then how could there be any appearance of it? And if there's no appearance of these, then how can there be an ultimate truth? There couldn't be, there wouldn't be any relative. So how can you say that there are two truths? If it's from another relative, how could beings reach nirvana? If there's no real, ultimately real basis for the appearance, then it's all like a house of cards and nothing could happen. And if nothing can happen, then beings wouldn't be able to enter the path and practice and reach nirvana, because everything would be based on nothing. It would be like trying to climb a ladder made out of rabbit horns. You can't do it because there's nothing there, right? But if, so the response is, but that is someone else's thought. So the being who has reached nirvana, who has reached Buddhahood, and here by nirvana we mean Buddhahood, has gone to the point where they see that, yes, all of those are thoughts. When we go through all these logics, and we talk about the self and the other, when we talk about objects and feelings and so forth, and we analyze them, we're analyzing relative phenomena, none of which can really exist. But when you go through these logics and you transcend that, you get to the state of Buddhahood, you realize that that is how other people conceive of it. It's like the question this morning about what do you perceive at the level of Buddhahood? At that level, you've gone beyond all the dualistic thoughts. The dualistic mind has ceased. You're only left with the inconceivable, omniscient wisdom that is empty and unidentifiable, but still knowing. For the Buddha, there's no question of relative or ultimate. There's no question of same or other. But the Buddha understands how it is. And so they understand that other people think of there being same and other, relative and ultimate, there being a path to follow in achieving Buddhahood. That is not the Buddha's thought, it is other people's thought. It is not their own relative. So they recognize that there's that people experience the relative truth, but it's not for them real. They know that, they understand the nature. It would exist if recognized later. If not, there is no relative. So here, these two lines are talking about kind of the Bodhisattva path. It would exist if recognized later. When you first see emptiness, on the path of seeing, when you're resting in meditation, at that point, you don't see any self, you don't see any other, things are not one, things are not separate, right? They're not one, they're not separate. There's nothing, you cannot distinguish any single or separate self, other, any of these dualistic ideas. The same realization as a Buddha has. But the first level Bodhisattva is not able to sustain that meditation constantly. So they arise from the meditation. And when they arise from the meditation, they have these dualistic thoughts of self, other, one, multiple, one and many, same and separate, and so forth. So for them, when they are in their post-meditation, they perceive the relative with a difference from us in that they no longer have any clinging to it as being real because they have seen its nature. It appears to them, but they do not cling to it as being real. For the Buddha, it doesn't appear, but the Buddha knows it. If not, if it doesn't arise later, that is, if you've reached Buddhahood, then there is no relative. For the Buddha, there is no relative truth. They do not perceive the things of relative truth, and yet they know them in a way without knowing them. They see them without seeing them, as Mikyo Dorje said. And then refuting that there is an infinite regress. So the objection is that, well, when you're doing this analysis, you've got the thought and you've got the thing that you're thinking of, and they're dependent upon each other. So the thought and what is thought of both are each dependent on the other. You are analyzing something and you're thinking about it. For example, you're analyzing the body. There's the body that you're being analyzing, and you've got the mind that is analyzing. And the one is being analyzed only because there's the analyzing mind. The analyzing mind can only be there because of the thing that's being analyzed. They're dependent upon each other. If there's no body to be analyzed, how can you have a mind analyzing it? It doesn't make any sense, right? Can you analyze a rabbit horn, take it with your microscope and look at it and check it out? You can't, because there's no rabbit horn. In the same way, if the body does not exist, how can you practice mindfulness of body? If feelings don't exist, how can you practice mindfulness of feelings, right? They're not there. So the practice doesn't make sense. And the response is all the analyses are stated according to the common consensus. When we are examining things in the middle way, we aren't examining as if according to them being there. We are examining them according to the common consensus, our general shared ideas of what things are. Our shared idea as humans, as sentient beings, is that there's a me. Our shared idea is that we have bodies. And so when we analyze, we're analyzing what we think of as the body to see, is it real or not? Is it a real body or not? We're analyzing our feelings. Are they real or not? We're analyzing what we think of as being our mind. Is it real or is it not? And this is according to the generally accepted ideas of what it is. Not necessarily saying that it has to exist for us to examine it. So in other words, we're examining these to see, are they real or are they not? The opponent's rebuttal is, if the analysis must be analyzed analytically, so too must that analysis be analyzed ad infinitum. So if that's the case, they say, well, you're analyzing that. Once you've finished analyzing the body, then you've still got this mind that's doing the analyze. So then you need to analyze that. And then once you've analyzed that, then you need to analyze the mind that analyzed it and so forth until you have an infinite regress, they say. So then you'd never be finished with the analysis. You'd never reach Buddhahood. Responding to that, Shantideva says, when the object has been analyzed, there is no basis to analyze. Without a base, it won't arise, and this is what is called nirvana. So when you are engaging in the practice of the four foundations of mindfulness, and you analyze the body, feeling, mind, and dharmas, and find that there's nothing left to analyze, no basis for analysis, at that time, you've seen the nature, and there's no need to analyze anymore. There's nothing to analyze, so there's no, no analysis will arise. And when that happens, it's kind of like you have a fire. We all know this. If you don't put more fuel on the fire, it goes out. When there is no more fuel to put on the fire, when you've burned through your 5 cords of wood in the winter, and you have no more wood to put on your wood stove, then the wood stove is going to go out. When there is nothing left to analyze, then there will be no more analysis, and that is what is called nirvana. That is what we call. In other words, once you've reached the state of Buddhahood or of awakening, there's no more need to engage in analysis, and so it falls off because you don't need it anymore. Just as when a piece of firewood has been burnt, it's done. There's no need to burn it again. Okay, so among the 5 main topics of the chapter, we've been through the benefits of chapter, identifying what prajna is, how to meditate on emptiness. And so that means that tomorrow we will speak about the last 2 topics, refuting clinging to things and the results of meditating on emptiness. So that is a good place to leave right now. Let's see, there was a message that came in. I'm taking a look at the message. Basically, yeah, this is a message from someone who's speaking about okay, so this is a question about trauma research. The questioner had a conversation with a researcher who's talking about trauma. And this researcher was very skeptical of trauma. And he said it's basically, it's not that big an ideal. It's not that big a deal, the trauma, because it's basically using similar logics. And so the questioner asked him, if a tree falls in the forest and no one is there to experience it, does that mean it didn't happen? So what he's saying is that the trauma researchers say that know that body keeps the score, that there's a memory of the trauma in the body. So if you don't remember, that means the body was not there to experience it. How does that fit in with Shantideva's view? Well, I mean, trauma is an interesting one. I think I mentioned this a little bit in my talk on Thursday night, but of course, not all of you were there, and it was not recorded. So, I think that this does fit in with Shantideva's idea that of course, when you feel trauma, those are feelings that come up over and over again, and you can look at it through Shantideva's view. But I'm not sure that if you were experiencing that right now, because what's important here is that people do experience trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder. These are problems that people have. Soldiers who come back from wars have terrible memories. People who experience various traumas, they get woken up at night and they have problems. This is real. This is something that happens to people in the relative world. When we look at ultimately, it doesn't exist. If the people were able to realize that it's not true or real and truly realize this, then they would be able to be free of it. But it's difficult to get from the state that they're in to the state of being free of that trauma. And so the question becomes, what is the best way to deal with that? And I have to be completely honest here that my experience in this is very low. It's more theoretical than anything else. And other people may have other experiences or more experience than I do. But my feeling is that, like I said the other day, that trying to confront it head on with this sort of logic may work for a small minority of people, but probably wouldn't be the most effective therapeutic method. Okay, so ultimately, yes. But in terms of practice, there are other ways. And I think that there are probably methods that contemporary psychiatric methods can help get people to the point where they're able to start working with it. And then working on loving kindness, compassion, and bodhicitta would do an awful lot to help people. But they have to be brought to a place where they're able to do that first. So it's a question more of method than of ultimately. Yes, ultimately, if everyone could realize the meaning of this chapter, then there wouldn't be any experience of post-traumatic stress. But we can see that people do have these problems and that they need to be helped, and so we need to figure out the best way. So my guess is that loving kindness, compassion, and bodhicitta are probably effective methods for people who are ready to practice them. So how do we get people to be ready to practice them is an interesting question. And I don't have a good answer for that right now. Yes.
And there was a time somebody gave me a book by
Mm-hmm.
And then he wrote about growing up during the war.
Yeah.
And we learned that he still sometimes wakes up.
Yeah.
But I think you're right.
Excuse me?
I think you're right.
Yeah. Yeah. So the questioner, commenter, is saying that she'd read a book by Thich Nhat Hanh, and he spoke about even many years later how he sometimes still woke up at night remembering this. So I think that is one really good example. I think another really good example is Mingyur Rinpoche. If you read his book, Joy of Living, where he speaks about how he had panic attacks as a little kid, and then how he managed to work through them. And you can tell he still is aware of the feelings and things that could lead to it. He's still very much aware of that. And when you hear him teaching, he does have that experience. So yes, I think that's very true. I think Sheila has a question.
Hey, Khenpo.
Okay, let me turn up my volume so I can hear you, and mute so that I don't get feedback.
Okay. I understand about, to some degree, about the fact that mind and body are both unfindable. But I'm curious about how they're linked. You said they're somehow linked. And of course, we know that our mind and body work together. But I just wondered if you have anything more to say about that or how it happens.
See, trying to avoid feedback, so it takes a while to get to the response. So the question is, the questioner understands the idea of the body not being real, the mind not being real, and so forth, but we talk about there being a link between the two. So how does the link happen? What makes the link? So this actually, first of all, the link is relative. It's entirely relative, right? What happens is that when a being dies, the body can no longer support consciousness because it has died, right? It no longer is able to support it. And then the consciousness exits the body. There are different variations, but generally in how it's presented in different schools. If you read a teaching from the Theravada school, they'll explain it differently, but essentially, in the northern schools of Buddhism, we say that there is a period between the consciousness exiting one body and then entering the next. If we take the way it works with humans as like an example, it's similar, although the circumstances are slightly different. It's similar. There are similar processes with all the different types of rebirth as well, the main way it happens is that when that consciousness that then floats through the bardo or the between state is ready to take birth, or it's driven by its karma to take birth, it feels real desire for something. And what it feels desire for determines where it takes birth. For example, if the being feels like they are being blown about by really cold winds and they're just chilled to their bones, incredibly cold, then they see something warm in the distance and they want it, and then they end up falling into the hot hells. They feel like they're being chased by hot winds and they want something cool, and they end up falling into the cold hell realms. In the human body, what happens, and this is where we can talk about the link between the body and mind, is that at the moment that they see their parents engaging in sexual intercourse, then they are propelled by karma to take birth in that womb. And if they feel lust for their father, then they're born in a female body. If they feel lust for their mother, they are born in a male body. And they go in the womb and they find, well, at that time, they didn't know about ovums. They didn't have microscopes where you could see an ovum in the 7th century or even earlier when this was determined. They would come to the mixture of the father's semen and the mother's blood, or the moment when in scientific terms, where the sperm and ovum unite, the consciousness also enters it, and it says, mine. So it's merely that aspect of saying mine that creates the link, my body. Then the consciousness falls into a swoon, essentially. And then gradually through the process of the 12 links of interdependence, then over the stages in the fetus, the consciousness reawakens, but it still thinks mine. So the only thing that keeps our consciousness linked to our body in this lifetime is this strong feeling of thinking mine, because we think my body, because we're attached to that. That's the essence. It's a really deep-seated link. And it's hard to break, and I don't think we want to break it too early, because these are pretty good bodies, especially now that we're in contact with the Dharma. We want to use it keep it and use it as long as we can. So don't think to me, okay, I'm going to cast off this body. When you achieve the state of arhatship, there were many arhats who would then decide that they would then leave their body and they would pass away. For example, when the Buddha passed into parinirvana, there were many arhats who said, okay, the Buddha is gone, or we have already achieved arhatship, we're leaving. And they would leave their body because they had no longer any attachment. But for us right now, this link is important. But essentially, that link for the body is our own fixation and attachment. It looks like I have a new message here. They've changed how things work in Zoom. Yes, it's a follow-up about the question on the trauma, that there are many techniques to work upon on trauma issues. So that's very true. And so I haven't done enough I don't have enough expertise to say which ones work, but there certainly are many techniques, mindfulness-based neurofeedback and such, to help with that, with the trauma. Okay. Do we have any other questions this afternoon, or shall we call it a day? Maybe we should call it a day. Okay. And we will do that. That means I need to get things ready for reciting the prayers. And I've got slightly shorter version of the prayers than recited last night. Oh, hang on. I'm not doing everything in the right order. Okay, now I can engage in that step. Vajra Vidya Karma Choephel Karma Dun so wangur karma bavujendro Tine shabte zo dene nam Ching dewa shenang tong sunjo jume rogar si shi yongi chapta dorje chanya me la me shabla cha lo ting ring korve jatsu Jirong war le nyun chu sin bum gi ze pai nyam ta dro kun cho be pa wo je pa ji je zi la ma te ren cheno rin jen shi gi je si shi 용zen 마웨 생텐드레 데지 말메 넘세 달줄 베든들 제외 gonsozo 카이존 삼불르 토람 계신트삼 Gombe-yura gongde-san che-zi-zombe-ge-jiang-tempo-je Ma-we-seng-ge-la-rian-yu-zhi-zo-ka-ju Nam-le-da-bu-ka-ju Dan-zhu-ju-yong-le-karma-kam-sang-gi-shi-dan Rube Junsang Serji Treminyan Belve Chilbo Nyurez Ormi Shine Kaju Lame Tsotilgi Kambo Shewa Tabu Jetsu Lame Tuje Ranko De Jurbe Dasha Nyurdo Charwar Pache Mahakala Shamra Dante Patanjo Zani Ponyar Je Choki Chogo Nima Shunu Kanshinde Dende Summa Nyeze Ji Zalama Zasun Jatsu Dentu Da Lo Bande Dun Zeji Beji Tra Sove Duna Malu Patu Bejute Lume Meju Sanje na Taye Da Suju Tuje Chembo Da Yendu Samba Tuje Nam Sanje Jazen Bambe Kochi Kor De Dingot Ne pa yi de chen she ja shin kam de da ni di ne tse pu jur ma ta ke wa shen gi par ma chu par de ru je ne nan de sha tong sho de ke da gi mun nam ta ba di 这知三知长生tam知己给没知把真知浪知所大家tam真知呀不知那也发就这家这个此女做这让。Dargi du sunge saba kuncho sunna chiba bu jave temba te yuji gewa senjen kuna ho jogu sanje to jurji geza tamje jidute Dagi jula min jurji ne dane tsozo te tsere ne menyam do pe sendir sajunun jurji namshi tsebu jurmata dewa chendu ki jurji Kene peme kache te luten de la sangye sho. Chanchu to ne ji si do tru be do wa dren ba sho. Sunam de tam je si ba nye. 토네네 베라남 밤체네 게가나 지바 시베토 레로 Okay, thank you all. I'll see you all tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific. I sound like a TV advertisement. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you, Khenpo.
Thank you, Khenpo.